They say that those who hear the siren's song are doomed to drown, to surrender themselves to the water and the voice that calls them deeper, to become nothing more than bones scattered across the seafloor where light cannot reach and memory dissolves into salt and silence. I heard her song and I did not drown, though there are moments when I wish I had, moments when I understand that survival is not always mercy, but sometimes the cruelest punishment imaginable. My name is Marcus, and I am the only man to have heard a siren's full song and lived to walk on land again. And the price of that survival was a gift that became a curse, a transformation that remade me into something neither fully human nor capable of returning to the innocence I possessed before her voice entered my ears and changed the fundamental architecture of how I perceive the world. It happened on a research vessel in the Mediterranean, in waters so blue they seemed artificial, like something painted rather than real, like color that existed only in dreams or in the memories of people who had lost the ability to distinguish between what they had seen and what they had imagined. I was a marine biologist, 28 years old, arrogant with education and certainty, convinced that the ocean held mysteries but not magic, that every legend was simply misunderstood biology, waiting for proper classification. We were studying cetacean communication patterns, recording whale songs and dolphin clicks, building databases that would help us understand how intelligence manifests in species that never developed hands or fire or the written word. I spent my days listening to recordings through headphones that blocked out the human world and let me exist briefly in the acoustic realm of creatures whose languages we had barely begun to comprehend. She came to us on the 5th night of our research cruise, rising from water that was black and still. Appearing in the spotlight, we used to illuminate the collection nets we had deployed over the side of the vessel. At first, I thought she was a swimmer, someone who had fallen overboard from another ship, and I shouted for help, for life preservers and rescue equipment. But as she drew closer, as the light caught the details of her form, I saw that she was not human, not entirely, her upper body recognizable as feminine, but her lower body transforming into something else, scales that caught the light and threw it back in colors that had no names, a tail that moved through water with a fluidity that made human swimming look clumsy and desperate by comparison. She looked up at me with eyes that were too large, pupils adapted for seeing in darkness absolute, and she opened her mouth and began to sing. The song was not music in any conventional sense, not melody or harmony or rhythm that could be transcribed into notation that human instruments could reproduce. It was pure frequency, vibration that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my skull, in my chest, in the base of my spine, where the most primitive parts of my nervous system still remembered being something other than human. The song spoke to desires I had never consciously acknowledged, to hungers that existed beneath language and social conditioning, to the raw animal needs that civilization teaches us to suppress and deny. It showed me what I wanted, not in images but in sensations, in phantom touches and imagined heat, in scenarios that played out in my mind with the clarity of memory, though they had never happened and could never happen because they required me to be someone else, somewhere else, freed from the limitations of my body and my biography. I felt myself moving toward the rail, felt my hands gripping the cold metal, felt my body preparing to climb over and drop into the water where she waited, with arms extended in welcome or in hunger or in some emotion that contained both and transcended the distinction between them. And then, in the moment before I would have jumped, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. Another sound cut through her song, a frequency higher and sharper, painful enough to break the spell, to shock me back into the part of my mind that understood I was standing on the deck of a research vessel and not swimming through tropical waters toward a creature that would drown me with ecstasy and indifference. I collapsed, my legs giving out, my vision blurring, and the last thing I saw before unconsciousness took me was her face, her expression shifting from invitation to something else. something that looked almost like surprise or perhaps disappointment, before she slipped beneath the surface and disappeared into the depths that had birthed her. I woke in the ship's infirmary 12 hours later with a headache that felt like my skull was cracking open from inside, with a ringing in my ears that would persist for weeks, and with a peculiar new awareness that I initially attributed to trauma or neurological damage from whatever had happened on deck. When the ship's doctor came to examine me, I could see it superimposed over his professional demeanor and concerned expression, a vivid flash of imagery that showed me exactly what aroused him, what he fantasized about when alone, what desires he kept buried beneath years of medical training and social propriety. It was not a vague sense or an intuition. It was direct perception, as clear and undeniable as seeing his physical form, and it made me recoil with a shock that he interpreted as pain from my injury rather than horror at this invasive new capacity. The ability did not fade as I recovered from the encounter. If anything, it intensified, sharpening with each passing day until I could not be in the presence of another human being without immediately seeing the landscape of their sexual desire spread before me like a map, like a territory I had not asked to access and could not choose to ignore. The crew members, the researchers, everyone I encountered became transparent in ways that destroyed the comfortable fictions that allow people to coexist without being overwhelmed by each other's inner lives. I saw what they wanted, who they wanted, the scenarios that played in their minds during boring meetings and long night watches, the images they called up to distract themselves from loneliness or boredom, or the simple biological imperative that does not care about appropriateness or consequence. When we returned to port and I tried to resume my normal life, the ability came with me, infecting every interaction with knowledge I did not want and could not unknow. Walking through a crowded street became an assault of overlapping desires, a cacophony of want and need and hunger that made me understand why hermits retreat to mountaintops and caves, seeking not enlightenment, but simply escape from the unbearable volume of human appetite. I saw the married man who desired his neighbor's teenage son, saw the grandmother who fantasized about violence, saw the priest whose prayers were interrupted by visions that would have destroyed his vocation if anyone knew. And I saw myself too, reflected in their perceptions when they looked at me, saw what I triggered in them, what fantasies I became part of without consent or control. Perhaps you have felt this too, this sense of being overwhelmed by knowledge you never asked for, by seeing too much of what should remain hidden, by understanding that the surfaces we present to each other are necessary fictions, and that truth, when exposed completely, is not liberating but devastating. If you have experienced something like this, if you understand what it means to carry perception as burden rather than gift, share your thoughts in the comments below. Because what I learned in the months after surviving the Siren song is that there are forms of knowledge that damage the vessel that contains them, that some truths are toxic to human consciousness and require isolation or madness to metabolize. I researched sirens, diving into mythology and folklore with the desperation of someone looking for a cure, looking for precedent, looking for any suggestion that others had survived this transformation and found ways to live with it. The ancient texts were contradictory, describing sirens as demons or as victims, as malicious destroyers of men, or as tragic figures punished by gods for crimes they did not commit. But one theme emerged consistently across cultures and centuries, that the Siren song reveals desire, strips away the pretense and self-deception that humans use to avoid confronting what they truly want. The sailors who drowned were not killed by the sirens, but by their own wanting, by the realization that they desired things they could never have and could no longer live without. And those rare survivors, mentioned briefly in fragmentary accounts, were described not as heroes, but as cursed, as men who returned from the sea changed in ways that made them alien to their own species. I became one of those cursed survivors, unable to maintain relationships because every moment of intimacy was poisoned by knowing exactly what the other person wanted and seeing how rarely it aligned with what I could provide. Seeing how much of human connection is based on strategic ignorance and the mercy of not looking too closely at each other's inner landscapes. I tried to explain my condition to therapists, to doctors, to anyone who might help. But how do you describe seeing something that has no physical manifestation, that exists in a perceptual dimension most people do not believe is real? They suggested trauma, hallucination, psychological projection, anything but the possibility that I had been fundamentally altered by an encounter with something that science refuses to acknowledge. I returned to the ocean, not to the Mediterranean where I had met her, but to different waters, colder and darker, where the pressure of the deep made a physical metaphor for the pressure I felt constantly inside my skull. I worked as a deckhand on fishing vessels, as a diver inspecting oil rig foundations, as anything that kept me in the presence of the sea that had remade me. And sometimes, on very still nights when the water reflected stars like a mirror, and the boundary between surface and sky dissolved into seamlessness, I would see her, or someone like her, shapes that moved beneath the surface with purpose and grace, watching me with eyes that caught moonlight in ways that human eyes cannot. And I would wonder if she had known what would happen, if the song had been meant to kill me or to transform me, if survival had been accident or intention, mercy or malice or something outside those human categories entirely. The worst moments were not the public ones, not the overwhelming assault of desires in crowded places, but the private ones, the moments alone when I had no one else's wants to distract me from my own. Because the Siren song had not only opened my perception to others' desires, it had clarified my own, stripped away the layers of rationalization and societal conditioning, and shown me what I truly wanted with a clarity that was unbearable. And what I wanted was impossible, was her, was the creature who had sung to me and shown me something so profound and terrible that I could never be satisfied with the shallow connections that constitute human intimacy. I wanted to return to that moment on the deck, to make the choice I had been prevented from making, to jump into the water and follow her into depths where pressure would crush my lungs and darkness would consume me, and I would finally stop seeing, stop knowing, stop carrying this burden of perception that made every human interaction feel like a betrayal of the truth I had glimpsed in her song. Years passed. I aged in ways that had nothing to do with calendar time, my face acquiring lines from squinting against glare on water, from the constant tension of filtering out the desires of everyone I encountered, from the exhaustion of existing in a state of perpetual invasive intimacy with a species I no longer fully belonged to. I stopped trying to form connections, stopped pretending I could function normally in the social world, stopped believing that this curse would ever lift, or that I would ever find peace in the life I had not chosen but had been forced to inhabit by the accident of surviving what should have killed me. If this story has touched something in you, if it speaks to the loneliness of carrying knowledge that isolates you from your own kind, then I ask you to do something that matters more than you might realize. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that explore the depths we rarely acknowledge, the places where myth and human experience intersect and transform each other in ways that leave permanent marks. Do this not for entertainment, but for witness, for the creation of community among those who understand that the world is stranger and more terrible and more beautiful than conventional wisdom allows, and that survival is not always victory, but sometimes simply endurance, the grim determination to continue existing even when existence has become a form of exile. I'm 43 now, still working on the water, still unable to set foot on land for more than a few days, before the press of human desire becomes unbearable, and I must return to the sea that changed me. I have learned to manage the ability somewhat, to filter and distance, to create mental walls that allow me brief interactions without being completely overwhelmed. But it is always there, this knowledge, this seeing, this unwanted gift that the siren's song bestowed when she failed to drown me but succeeded in drowning the person I was before I heard her voice. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks of me, if creatures like her remember the humans they encounter, if my survival was notable enough to persist in whatever passes for memory in a consciousness so different from ours. I wonder if she knows what she did to me, if the transformation was intentional, if there was purpose behind the song, or if it was simply her nature, the way a flame burns or water flows, not malicious but not innocent either, just existing according to its own design, without concern for what it destroys or transforms in the process of being what it is. I've seen her once more since that first encounter, or perhaps it was another of her kind. Impossible to distinguish individual identity in creatures who share a form but not necessarily a singular consciousness. It was 3 years ago, in the Arctic waters off Norway, in a place so remote that human presence was measured in weeks or months between sightings. I was on a research vessel again, come full circle to the work that had brought me to her initially, though now I was crew rather than scientist, a technician maintaining equipment rather than interpreting data. She surfaced near the ship at twilight, in that liminal hour when the world is neither day nor night, but something undefined between, and she looked at me with recognition or curiosity, or perhaps just the acknowledgement that passes between beings who have shared something that cannot be undone or forgotten. She did not sing this time. Perhaps she saw that I was already changed, already carrying the marks of our first encounter, and there was nothing more her song could do to me or take from me. She simply watched me for a moment that extended beyond measurable time, and then she descended, her tail breaking the surface once, before she disappeared into water so dark it looked solid, looked like a floor rather than a passage to depths that continue beyond the reach of human technology and imagination. And I stood at the rail where I had stood before, and I did not jump, because I understood finally that drowning would not free me, that death would not undo what her song had done, that I was marked permanently, transformed completely, and would carry this burden until my body failed and return to the water that had been my ruin and my only real home since the night I heard something that no human should hear and survived something that survival could not accommodate. I'm the only man who survived her song, and I live now in the terrible space between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, seeing too much of one and too little of the other, carrying knowledge that grants no power and provides no comfort, but simply exists as weight, as pressure, as the constant awareness that beneath the surface of every human interaction lies a depth of wanting that most people spend their lives successfully ignoring. And I envy them that ignorance, that mercy, that protection from the truth that I can no longer unsee, the truth that the siren song revealed and that continues to echo in every moment of my remaining life. A frequency that never fades, a melody that plays endlessly in a register only I can hear, reminding me always of what I survived and what I lost in the surviving, reminding me that some encounters change you so completely that the person you were before ceases to exist. And all that remains is this strange hybrid creature, not quite human, not quite other, existing in permanent exile from both the land and the sea, from both the world of surfaces and the world of depths, forever hearing the echo of a song that should have killed me, but instead granted me the most isolating form of vision imaginable, the ability to see into the desires of everyone I meet, and to understand, with crushing clarity, that I will never be what they want, and they will never satisfy what the siren showed me I desire, because what I desire exists only in the impossible space where her song still resonates, in the memory of a moment when I was about to surrender everything and become something else entirely, a transformation interrupted, a death postponed, leaving me stranded in a life I no longer recognize as my own.